How much do you know about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza? Are you aware of the magnitude of suffering that has taken place? In the recent conflict, over 60% of homes and residential units have been obliterated or partially damaged. This includes 52,000 completely destroyed units and a staggering 253,000 partially damaged ones. Government buildings and schools have not been spared either, with nearly 200 of them completely out of service. The human cost of this crisis is overwhelming, with casualties pouring into overwhelmed hospitals. The situation in Gaza is dire, with a rapidly escalating humanitarian crisis. Let us take a step back and understand how we arrived at this point. This story begins with an aggressive Israeli bombardment and ground invasion of the Gaza Strip. This operation, targeting Hamas militants and their tunnel network, was accompanied by a heavy onslaught from above. The devastation caused by 3 weeks of bombing was immense, and a humanitarian crisis began to unfold. As the war waged on, the people of Gaza found themselves in an increasingly desperate situation. The shutdown of mobile phone and internet networks hampered relief efforts, leaving the population isolated and in dire need of help. Hospitals and healthcare centers, once beacons of hope, were now out of service, unable to cater to the needs of the wounded and the sick. The lack of supplies worsened the predicament, leaving medical professionals helpless in the face of this crisis. The humanitarian situation in Gaza reached a breaking point when the Israeli Defense Forces decided to stay in the region until further orders. The lack of communication and relief due to the network shutdown exacerbated the suffering of the people. As the conflict intensified, the displacement of people became a tragic reality. Over 2/3 of Gaza's population had to flee their homes, seeking refuge in overcrowded UN-run shelters in the south. The southern part of the territory, however, was not safe either, as it was frequently subjected to air raids. In a call for peace and relief, the United Nations voted for a humanitarian truce. However, this measure was vetoed by the US, further complicating the situation. The veto, coupled with concerns about the effectiveness of Israel's aggressive approach, added fuel to the already raging fire. The situation has been escalating rapidly, with no end in sight. The future hangs in a delicate balance, with the fate of countless lives at stake. As the crisis worsens, the need for a resolution becomes more urgent than ever. Beyond the numbers, there are real people, real lives affected by this crisis. Lives are being upended in unthinkable ways. In the heart of the conflict, the human cost is staggering. High civilian and military casualties are a grim reality. Mothers and fathers, sons and daughters are being torn apart by the violence. The crisis is not only measured in the rubble of buildings, but in the shattered lives left behind. Over 2/3 of the population have been forced to flee their homes. These displaced individuals have found themselves in overcrowded UN-run shelters, where they face a new set of challenges. Imagine the fear and uncertainty of living day to day, not knowing whether you'll have a roof over your head or food for your next meal. Starvation is being used as a weapon of war, with only a fraction of the necessary food supplies reaching those in need. The cruel irony is that while the world produces more than enough food to feed every single person, there are those who are going hungry due to man-made conflict. Healthcare is another casualty of the crisis. Hospitals and healthcare centers are out of service or operating under extreme difficulties. This leaves the sick, the injured, and the vulnerable in a desperate situation. Imagine needing medical help and finding the hospital doors closed. The crisis is not only about the destruction of buildings and infrastructure, but also about the destruction of human lives and dignity. It's about the loss of hope, the loss of security, and the loss of a future. It's about the human cost of conflict, and it's a cost that's too high to bear. In the face of such a crisis, you may ask, what can I do? In a world where information is power, the first step is to spread awareness. Share the stories you hear, the knowledge you gain. The plight of Gaza needs to be known. But awareness is just the beginning. There are organizations dedicated to providing aid to Gaza, groups like Oxfam and various United Nations agencies. These organizations are on the ground, doing their best to alleviate the suffering, but they need our help. Donating to these organizations can provide food, medical supplies, and other vital resources to those affected by this crisis. Every dollar, every cent contributes to a loaf of bread, a bottle of water, a bandage for a wound. But remember, not all contributions are monetary. Time is a valuable asset. Volunteer, advocate, use your voice to demand action from world leaders. Your contribution, no matter how small, can make a difference. Remember, change begins with awareness.